a number of patients at time of death, and she had seen on 3 occasions orbs leaving the body at time of death. And this is a famous photograph of the same type of phenomenon. There are lots of things that seem to happen when consciousness is involved, which cannot be explained by the conventional Western physics model. Levitation is another one. Our present theory of gravity certainly doesn't have any place in it to explain things like this. But this is a story from Yogananda's wonderful book, Autobiography of a Yogi. He said, I saw a yogi remain in the air several feet above the ground last night in a group meeting. My friend Upendra Mohan Chowdhury spoke impressively. I gave him an enthusiastic smile. Perhaps I can guess his name. Was it Baduri Mahasaya of Upper Circular Road? He nodded, a little crestfallen, not to be the news bearer. There are many accounts of adepts of various kinds and yogis who are able to levitate, although it's difficult to get them to come into the lab, so we don't have much data on this. One of the famous cases was Brother Joseph of Cupertino, a monk who who lived several hundred years ago, and for his other fellow monks in the monastery, it was kind of a problem because they took turns in the dinner service, and sometimes he'd be carrying the trays, and he'd begin floating up to the ceiling, and they would have to reach over and pull him down. When they were doing Mass, he would get very excited during the music, and he would sometimes start floating up. He would float to the front, to the altar. The Pope at the time did an investigation when he died and interviewed hundreds of people and concluded, yes, that it was genuine. But we don't have a lot of really verified examples. This is David Douglas Hume, who was investigated by Sir William Crookes, who was the president of the Royal Society at one time, and investigated Hume for many years, and he was able to levitate, among other strange phenomena. Just one more example, teleportation. These are challenges for Western physics again, but the Chinese, back about 20, 30 years ago, began doing a sweep of their population of 1 billion plus people, looking for individuals who had paranormal abilities. And Paul Dong, a Chinese American, has written several good books about some of the people they came up with and some of the phenomena that occurred. One was named Zhang Baozheng, who was gifted with teleportation and other abilities. He was given an expensive sports car. He lived in Hong Kong and was given an expensive sports car. He used to zip around town and speed at high speed or through stoplights with this fancy car, and policemen would pull him over and write him a ticket, but they got back to the police station and they found the tickets had all disappeared. So they learned after a while, just leave him alone, don't bother. But we know about some of these things because at one time, VIP visitors coming through China would be given demonstrations of some of these things. So we've had a little bit of access, but I think this has become more rare in recent years. Uri Geller is also was involved in a controlled experiment in England where he managed to make part of a crystal disappear that was encapsulated. Near-death experiences, another area where paranormal things, very difficult to understand, occur. I'm sure you all know about these, and maybe you've even had some yourself or have friends who have. The interesting thing about near-death experiences is that they've been known about for a long time. This is a painting by Hieronymus Bosch, 500, 600 years ago. This is called the Empyrean Realm. He's showing a tunnel to a region of light on the other end. There's spirals inside the tunnel. There are angels and beings there. It's very much like the description of the tunnel that people describe when going through a near-death experience. When you're on the other side, again, it's like a higher dimension. The rules are different. Here's Daniel Brinkley's describing his near-death experience, where these beings of light, each having a different color, carry some aspect of his personality and show him visions of the future. Typically when people are on the other side, they come back describing it as a place that you could go to, as a dimension, there are features like buildings and other structures, although consciousness has a lot more effect over there than here, but it's as though these are parallel dimensions or higher dimensions. Reincarnation is, of course, another area of research where we can get more information about the nature of the other side. What is life after death like? There are people who have built devices where they're able to more or less successfully communicate with the other side, and this is Christopher Moon, a researcher in Colorado. Gary Schwartz, professor at the University of Arizona, did experiments with mediums who claimed to be able to contact those on the other side. Of course, a lot of skeptics would say, well, they're doing cold readings, they're looking at voice inflections, they're figuring out from how you respond. But Schwartz did blind experiments where the medium could not see the people he was reading. He just gave a cold reading totally without being able to see the other person. And these are the accuracies for 5 of the mediums he was testing. And they came out, most of them above chance, and showed that it was not any kind of trickery. There's a real phenomenon here. Some individuals have been able to learn how to master these abilities and are able to work with researchers to further demonstrate these things cannot be explained by Western science. Yogananda is on the right here, and his teacher Sri Yukteswar on the left. One of those wonderful, rare accounts of what life is like as a yogi, what the training is like, and various experiences he had with some of the great adepts in India. The lower graph shows another yogi being studied by Elmer Green in the early 70s, who was able to cause big changes in 2 different points on his hand, causing an 11-degree change, difference between those 2 points by concentration alone. Other famous yogis or adepts or masters who learned how to do these feats, Apollonius of Tyana, who was lived there around the same time as Jesus, and in many places was even more famous than Jesus because of his ability to perform miracles. This is a comment, it's more or less a lament by one of the early church fathers, who says, "How is it that the talismans of Apollonius have power in certain members of creation? For they prevent, as we see, the fury of the waves, and the violence of the winds, and the attacks of wild beasts. And whilst our Lord's miracles are preserved in tradition alone, those of Apollonius are most numerous and actually manifested in present facts, so as to lead astray all beholders." Apollonius was quite famous at the time, and was actually, a statue of him was worshipped by the Roman governor during that part of his life. In later years, his fortune went against him, and they tried to arrest him and pulled him into court. And on 2 different occasions, the first time they opened a scroll listing all of his offenses and crimes, except when they opened it, the words had all disappeared, and it was totally blank. The second court case, and these are actually recorded in the Roman records of the day. The second time, he disappeared in a flash of light and smoke and was never seen again. But it's a well-documented case of an adept who did take part in Roman society at that time. I think what I've been trying to do is understand the nature of some of these higher dimensions and these abilities, because they're things that ought to be part of science. I mean, at least hopefully, but not the science we have today. There's not a place right now in our present Western science that can account for these things. But there are clues. Yogananda's teacher says all creation is governed by law. The principles that operate in the outer universe, discoverable by science, are called natural laws. But there are subtler laws that rule the hidden spiritual planes and the inner realm of consciousness. Those principles are knowable through the science of yoga. It's not the physicist, but the self-realized master who comprehends the true nature of matter. And I think that one of the things that we learn here at the Monroe Institute is the nature of some of these higher dimensions by going to various focus levels, by learning more and more about how things behave in these higher dimensions. It's broadening our experience. That's one of the reasons I came to Monroe several times at various programs. And I mean, to me, this is the future. This is a clue to how the world really works. One more clue is found in a book by Yogananda's teacher, Sri Yukteswar, who's kind of explaining these higher dimensions and how the world is put together. And this diagram was what the students used to summarize what Sri Yukteswar was saying. And in it, there are various levels. There is the astral level with 10 dimensions. There's a causal level. There's the Buddhic level. At the bottom, there's a little bag hanging down at the very bottom, which is the physical level. And it sort of says that the physical world is really a small fraction of all the higher dimensions that all are present in our universe. And if we want to understand, the true universe, it's important to understand these higher dimensions. If you look at the theosophical material of Blavatsky and others, which all goes back to yogis in India, they talk about the physical, the etheric level, the astral plane, the mental, the causal, and the Buddhic. Each of these has dimensions, and typically as you go up in level, there are more and more dimensions. So these are all clues that in our normal physical life, we're only aware of a small fraction of what's really out there. And of course, if you make an out-of-body a vehicle, as they say, that you can travel in to have an out-of-body experience, then you can actually visit some of these dimensions. And many of the adepts who write in this literature describe what it's like and what the nature of these higher dimensions really is. One of the things that struck me in reading Yogananda's book is he talks about these higher dimensions as being made up of lifetrons. If you're in the astral realm or the causal realm or the mental realm, you may see structures, you may see landscapes. But it's not landscapes of physical matter. And yet, when you're in that dimension, it has many properties that are similar to a physical landscape. The rules may be a little bit different. It may respond to consciousness in a different way, but you see structures. It's not just a big blur. And so this idea of lifetrons and of some form of matter, as you might call it, seems to be present in all the higher dimensions. So that's been one of the motivations for me, trying to understand what these lifetrons are like and what the rules are by which they would exist in different dimensions. Of course, the layers around the body, the energy layers of the body, also are really important in understanding higher dimensions. Typically, if you're a clairvoyant or energy healer and are able to see the energy fields, then you may describe various levels. Mitek Birkus is an energy healer who lives here in Virginia, who actually Maryland, but in the D.C. suburbs. I met Mitek more than a decade ago. It's 2 decades ago. He's from Poland, but a very gifted energy healer and clairvoyant, and he could see these layers and would describe what he was seeing to me. The astral body, for example, which is one of these layers, tends to correspond to our emotional state. As he watches it, he'll say that the energy is fluctuating. It'll come in and come out. The different colors will change as the emotions of the person change. This is sort of describing one dimension or one plane of the many levels that are present due to consciousness. It's been described, you can think about it very simply in terms of these layers as being like little paper dolls, where you have a bunch of folded paper that are all folded over. You cut out a form, you have many levels here, and there's a physical level, an etheric, an astral, a mental. They're all present at the same time. They're all present around the body, but they each have a presence in a different dimension. Here is a Curlian photograph. A lady standing on a platform with high voltage, high frequency, while a camera is doing a time-lapse photography. And there is an aura showing up around her. When she's trying to go out of body, they found, remarkably, that the brightness that's showing up in the camera image, which is the right-hand frame here, actually appears to her side. So these things have a form of reality. They're real. But our Western science doesn't understand it. One of the things that I've come up with, it's in my second book, is, I think, an explanation for what the nature of the aura really is. My first book was called The Synchronized Universe, which pulls together these various paranormal phenomena, what's the evidence for each one of them, and then the last chapter is how can we fit those into a scientific model to begin to explain them. Richard Bartlett, who developed matrix energetics and is a well-known healer in this country, made the following comment about my book, about this book. He said, well, he said very flattering things, let's put it that way. I blush. but I didn't stop me from putting it in the book. The second book is called Life Force: A Scientific Basis, and tries to look at these phenomena in terms of how you would make a science of it. And one of the things that is different between all these phenomena and normal Western science is the presence of a special energy, which the Chinese call qi, the Hindus call prana. It's an energy that doesn't obey the laws of Western physics, but it does, it's integral to consciousness. Consciousness creates it, consciousness affects it, and it seems to be one of the keys to going from where our science is now to a science that can include the effects of consciousness. And Professor Rustam Roy, a full professor at Penn State, called my book a tour de force. Elmer Green, who founded ISEAM, the subtle energy group, said it's one for the ages. I highly recommend it. And it's a big book. It took me about 7 years to write, and has a lot of references, a lot of graphs, a lot of figures. But I really tried to my best to kind of bring these things into a science. Both books have been used as college textbooks, and the real key is understanding the nature of this energy, the life force. It's been around and known for a long time, but the difficulty in integrating it to Western science is that it often shows up in different forms or different ways, and it's frequently not recognized for what it is. So I use this cartoon of the 6 blind scientists and the elephant, where the elephant is subtle energy or the life force, but when you look at it in different ways, you see different things. You see a rope, you see a tree trunk, you see a wall, just as the 6 blind men did. However, the Chinese knew about it for thousands of years. It's the basis of of Chinese medicine. This is Wang Di, the Yellow Emperor, who formalized the Chinese medicine several thousand years ago. A modern Qigong master who uses it for healing says it's the fundamental life force that permeates all things. Qi connects and animates everything in the universe. The Chinese have learned how to use this energy for healing and they can heal a lot of things that we can't heal in the West with conventional medicine. But this energy has amazing abilities to improve health and to heal diseases. A Chinese Qigong master says of this energy, over the years, I've treated more than 5,000 cancer patients and have no doubt through personal observations that Qigong made a positive difference in every one of them. There are lots of experiments to show that this energy does affect health in a positive way. I'm going to go briefly through some of this. One of the things that you notice, though, when these Qigong masters are using this energy, they do a special breathing. They build up this energy in their body by pulling it in, using intention to build up a concentration of it. When they do that, then they're able to do their miracles, to have this effect. So the Hindus call this technique of breathing pranayama. You're building up the level of subtle energy within the body. Martial artists in China have used this for thousands of years as a form of warfare, a form of protection. In this particular example here, the fellow on the right is using qi to strengthen his body, to act like armor to protect it, while his buddies are attacking him with a pole, trying to knock him over. And it turns out that as you look into the literature, you find this energy has been known in almost every traditional or ancient civilization. The kahunas in Hawaii used this energy. Native Americans used it as well. They would charge up poles or pieces of wood with this energy and throw it at their enemy. And when it strikes the enemy, the chi or the prana goes into the enemy and makes him unable to control his muscles. They fall over, and there are many accounts of this, even American cavalry officers talking about this type of warfare going on with Native American tribes when they first encountered them. So projecting this energy at a distance, some people find that they can project the energy without using a pole to charge it up. This is Master Paul Dong on the left, using the qi directly. It can be projected through the air as a martial art form where there's no physical apparatus involved. He wrote a book called Empty Force, where he puts many accounts down of examples where this has been done. Another Qigong expert, Jixing Li, who is also from China but lives in California part-time, did experiments with this energy to show that you could project it long distance to affect cancer cells directly. In this experiment, Master Li was in California. A Western scientist was at Penn State in Hershey, Pennsylvania, with an incubator full of petri dishes with cancer cells growing in them. If you don't do anything to the cancer cells, the numbers of cells just rise exponentially over time. Then he would ask Master Li to send his energy to a particular dish, and he would notice the numbers of cells began curving over and going back to zero. He killed them from 2,000 miles away, and he could send the energy to a particular petri dish without affecting the other dishes around it. So this energy can be controlled by consciousness and can be directed very accurately. Another Qigong master, Dr. Yan Jin, used to do lectures. He would talk about projecting qi. And while he was talking about it, he would actually project it around the lecture hall. He was studied by physicists in China at the National Physics Institute there. They found that lithium fluoride crystals, which are used in particle physics detectors, they would set them up around the room, and when he projected qi, he would get counts, extra counts on these crystals. And this graph is showing on the horizontal blue line the background, the number of counts, the count rate you normally get, not doing anything. When he projected this qi around the room, they got 20 times more counts. So again, they're seeing this energy. It's actually it can be measured. Dr. Yanjin also was able to show that this energy can affect other physical processes that defy Western science to explain. Here, they had a Geiger counter set up with a radioactive decay target, americium, which gives off alpha particles randomly at a regular rate. It's decaying. When they asked the Qigong master to slow down the rate of decay, he could do it. They asked him to speed up the rate of decay. He could do that. He went 1,900 kilometers away. He could still change the rate of decay. So he could change effects that our science cannot begin to explain how you can do that, but the Qigong masters could do it. It's a form of PK, but here we have a better understanding of what the mechanism is that's making it possible. He was also able to change water structure and bend laser beams at great distances as well. One of the great scientists of the 20th century, he used to live in America, but it was a Chinese extraction, and then I apologize for my pronunciation here, Chen Shushen, who was kind of made big news when he went back to China a couple decades ago, but he was famous here. He founded the Chinese aerospace and rocket program. He authored a book in America called Engineering Cybernetics. He was listed in Wikipedia as one of the founders of Jet Propulsion Lab at Caltech and named Person of the Year in 1988 by Aviation Week in Space Technology. So he was a top scientist in this country before he went to China and became a leader in their space program. He studied the experiments that were done by Dr. Yanjin, which were done in collaboration with the National Physics Institute in China. And here's what he said. He said, these experimental results by Dr. Yanjin and his co-workers are a first in the world. They unequivocally demonstrate that without touching substances, the human body can affect them and change their molecular structures and properties. They are new scientific discoveries and the prelude to a scientific revolution. So that's the energy of consciousness. It's unlike any other force, and it's prelude to a scientific revolution. Professor Joie Jones at the University of California, Irvine, did experiments with the same energy. He was doing healing experiments with it. He took a certain strain of human-derived cells called HeLa, or HeLa cells, that he exposed them to gamma radiation, a large dose, that killed half of them in 24 hours. Then he asked healers, okay, see if you can send this healing energy to my cells and see if you can make them live longer. And here's what he found. And this experiment he continued over and over again over a 10-year period, hundreds, thousands of repetitions, very good statistics. He found that if you don't do anything, 50% survive after 24 hours. He kind of set things up so this would be normalized as the result. 50% die, 50% survive. That's the left-hand bar graph. Then if you send the healing energy after the radiation, 70% survive after 24 hours. If you do the healing before the radiation, 80% survive after 24 hours. If you do healing both before and after the radiation, 88% survive. This is replicated over and over again over many years. But he was frustrated because that was as high as he could get. Now, if you're familiar with healing experiments, energetic healing experiments, that's a remarkably high success rate. It's a fantastic success. Professor Jones was troubled, though. He said that he thought it should be 100%. He said, why is it not 100%? And one day, the thought occurred to him, maybe it's the karma of the cells. So in his next experiment, he had his assistant make a telephone call to a charity and make a gift to the charity with the intention that the good karma from this act would go to the cells. And the survival rate went to 96%. And it was replicated 100 times after that. So it's our first demonstration of this spiritual result, that karma itself is actually real, and now we have a measurable effect from it. So, be good for goodness sakes. So, all these experiments are talking about the life force and its connection with consciousness, but the question is, what is it? What, in terms of science, how do we understand this stuff? How can we connect it to the things that we understand in science? Is there a way? And there, I think the biggest breakthrough has been what the Russians call torsion. It was discovered in the hard sciences and astrophysics in the 1950s by a scientist named KOZYREV. At the present time, fully developed equations and experiments and patents and devices have been built. Here are what some of the, what one of the people involved in that program said. And by the way, you can go back to the great book, Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain by Ostrander and Schroeder, one of the great classics from 1970. These two ladies were over there in Eastern Europe and in Russia doing research at that time, talking to researchers about various phenomena, and the book is just packed with amazing insights and observations. They have a whole chapter on this man, Nikolai KOZYREV, and his work with torsion, because he felt that he had identified one of the real secrets of the nature of time, and was demonstrated things for them at that time. And the reason I'm saying that is because now, 40 years later, subsequent events have only borne out the importance of what he was doing. But here's one of the other people involved in the torsion program. He says from the late 80s until the late 90s, major experimental investigations were conducted that confirmed the theoretical predictions. It was established that torsion generators allow us not only to replicate all phenomena demonstrated by so-called psychics, but they're also able to demonstrate effects that were never demonstrated by any psychic. In other words, torsion appears to be the key force that makes psychic phenomena possible. There's a lot of circumstantial evidence to suggest that there was a secret program going on in Russia for several decades. And we only know about it because Glasnost and Perestroika, when the wall came down, the Berlin Wall came down, and Russia released its client states in the early 90s, and a lot of the scientists involved in these programs suddenly were out of work and out of funding. And a lot of them began publishing. They began making these things available that before that had been closed up. One of the scientists in those programs said, he describes applied research he was doing in 1991, and he mentions a coordination of 8 scientific teams and 30 years of research, which culminated in his effort. And this is a picture of Nikolai KOZYREV as a young man. And here's just the mention of the Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain book. There's lots and lots of supporting data. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of publications, most of them in Russian. I'm not going to read this to you here, but this is some comments by Russian physicists about particular high-energy physics experiments that appear to correlate with torsion, that are affected by torsion, and that where torsion is able to explain some of the anomalies that otherwise you can't really understand. In other words, it's a real effect. Now, I think there have been internet attacks over the years by a few people who try to say, oh, well, these Russians are just trying to divert you guys on a wild goose chase off into this false area, and don't look over there at that, don't ignore it. And I think that's probably because they kind of wish that it hadn't gotten out of the bag. That's my interpretation anyway. So you can make up your own minds. But I found that there's a lot of physicists who appear to have been involved in these programs. Tomsk University ran a program for more than a decade, doing hundreds of experiments with several dozen Russian scientists that also verified the reality of some of these torsion effects. And it appears to be a fundamental force that really needs to be in Western physics as well. And I'm going to give you kind of a really quickie tutorial. We can talk more about this later. I don't want to bore you if it is boring. But basically, torsion is a different kind of a force. It's a fundamental force that is a twisting of space-time. If you go back and think about Einstein's picture of a gravity as being a curving of space, torsion is a twisting of space, which is something Einstein left out of his original model. It's been developed by SHIPOV into a very sophisticated mathematical model. He has an entire book. In fact, he has a couple of books and lots of papers which, with equations very well developed that appear to describe the model. One of the top Russian experimentalists, Akimov, has said of SHIPOV that his equations are the most accurate and consistent with what they found about torsion. One little glimpse into SHIPOV's model is illustrated in this picture. As you may know today, in our Western physics, the standard belief is that most of what's out there in the universe is dark energy, which actually has a repulsive quality to it. Then we have a smaller amount that's dark matter, which has an attractive quality to it. However, both of these things we don't understand. They don't fit into the Western standard model of particles. Pretty much they were unexpected until observational physicists looked out at the universe and began noticing there are things out there that don't fit our old theory, which is Einstein's relativity. When I was in grad school in the 1970s, I was in the gravity group at Princeton. They were studying things like this, about what's happening with the universe and cosmology, but nobody was really worried much about dark matter or dark energy in those days. So it's kind of come fairly recently in our history of science, and yet you don't find very many physicists saying, oh, we were wrong, we were so stupid. You know, no one's they're all making it sound like, well, of course we know about dark matter, and of course we know about dark energy, as though they kind of expected it, and it fits so well. But it's something we really don't understand. It doesn't fit into our model. However, the interesting thing is that SHIPOV, the Russian theorist I just mentioned, these are in his model. These are actually predictions of his model, that it should look kind of like this. So his model appears to be an explanation for some of these things that are puzzling Western science. Unfortunately, you don't find Western physicists interested in looking into this stuff. So there's a disconnect there that's kind of hard to understand. Torsion gets created whenever particles flip their spin. Every elementary particle, like electrons, protons, neutrons that have mass, also have a spin. They spin like little tops. If that direction of spin changes, it creates a torsion wave, which they call a phyton. So this is happening all the time. At the small microscopic level, particles are emitting and absorbing these phitons. So they're really kind of present in space. They're not something unusual. There are lots of them around. I'm going to skip over some of this, but I think one way of understanding this force is that when a massive particle is sitting in space in our Western picture, there's a lot of dynamics going on, a lot of absorbing of energy and emitting of energy. It's really a very active process. It's only on the average that it's sitting still. It's an equilibrium between inflow and outflow. And when you accelerate the particle or make it move suddenly, you mess up this nice field of energy and you disturb it, knock it out of balance. And that's when these phitons are out of balance and they seem to be emitted or absorbed, so that torsion oftentimes shows up when there's a change.